Hey everyone, today I'm joined by Ryan Watson. Ryan is a partner at Upsourced, providing outsourced accounting, financial strategy, and M&A advisory services for creative agencies. I'd previously heard Ryan on a lot of podcasts and knew he's a man in the numbers. So I was excited to get him on an episode so that we could talk about the financials behind running an agency. And like most of these conversations, we ended up covering so much more. In this episode, we discuss how the hierarchy of financial needs can focus your efforts, why you should pay attention to the life cycle of agencies, how project profitability is changing, and more. Today's episode is brought to you by ZenPilot. There are lots of tools out there for agencies to manage projects, but any project issues aren't usually caused by the tool, they're from your own processes. ZenPilot helps agencies implement their project management tools while streamlining operations, so your team can move from chaos to clarity. You can see for yourself at zenpilot.com/forward. And now, ladies and gentlemen, Ryan Watson. It's easier than ever to start an agency, but it's only getting harder to stand out and keep it alive. Join me as we explore the strategies agencies are using today to secure a better tomorrow. This is Agency Forward. How can I set realistic goals for my agency?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I'd answer that in a couple ways. The first thing that you want to do is you want to be contextual with your goals about where you are so we have, y'all say this word a bunch of times when we talk, we have a bunch of frameworks that just kind of like frame out how we think about the world of agencies. And one of our frameworks is the Lifecycle of Agencies. And it just sort of recognizes that agency growth is a journey, and each stage, they're not same agency to agency, but boy, do they rhyme. And at each stage, the things that you focus on, the things you should care about, the solutions are going to be different, right? Sort of contextual based on the stage. And so the first question is like, what should your goals be about? So for instance, like if you're, if you're an agency, and we've got plenty of clients who have found themselves in these situations where you have a solvency crisis, right? Where you have got your payroll to payroll, you don't have a lot of cash in the bank, margins are terrible. You shouldn't be setting goals around things like repeatable sales growth or like net margin, like, oh, I want to get a 20% net margin. Like, yes, you do. But oh my gosh, we have several steps in the hierarchy of financial needs before we can even work. We have the privilege of thinking about those things. Right now, we got to like make payroll. But number two is like, we need to figure out a way to like get an adequate gross margin first before we can worry about, take home profit and those sorts of things. So, not to get all the way into the weeds, but the first is just like making sure you are realistic about where you are and what you should be focused on right now for your agency. The other thing that you should do is, there's this concept of like bottoms up versus top down. Top down is sort of like a swag. Like, an example of top down would be like, hey, this year, last year I did 2 million in revenue. This year I want to do 4 million in revenue. I'm just going to like start there. I'm going to pull that out of the sky. My goal is 4 million in revenue. It's a top down number. It's not based on anything. It's just your desires. And realistically, top down, especially early on, they're wishes. They're not goals. Right. Bottoms up goal is again based on the reality of your organization at this time, right? So a bottoms up goal would be to say, I have $2 million of revenue, right? Of that, each year, I believe, based on history, that I can retain 70% of my revenue. That doesn't necessarily mean it's on a retainer. It just means 70% of my revenue comes from clients I've worked with before. Often that's just follow-on projects, right? Like I work with Yale and I have a variety of projects with Yale. So the goal would be say, I know that a reasonable expectation of revenue retention would be 70%. And I have one seller and their quota is $1 million. And we've historically been able to hit that. So okay, if I retain 70% of my 2 million, that's 1.4. And if I have one seller who can hit a $1 million quota, that's 2.4. So if I don't do anything differently, 2.4 million is a reasonable goal. Now, if I want 3, I got to do something differently. I either have to find a way to retain more than 70%, or more realistically, I got to put more investment into new logo generation because I've only got one person. I know what they can do. So that's a bottoms up goal. So set bottoms up goals and make sure that they're based on the things that you should be focusing on now based on where you are as an agency. Anyway,
right.
Make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you ever get pushback from founders who still want to keep that top-down goal just as like
all
a
the time?
moonshot?
I mean, I wouldn't I wouldn't necessarily describe it as pushback. What I would say is like every agency has one of them. I mean, they just often do. Like there's nothing wrong with making wishes. There's nothing wrong with saying, I sure would like this to happen. And again, it's especially true for agencies that don't have repeatable revenue generation. So that whole exercise I just described, I have a seller and they have a quota and I have a retention. At earlier stages of agencies, it's like, well, actually, my revenue is mostly project-based. It comes from word of mouth. It comes from referrals. There's no way for me to predict that. Doing a bottoms-up exercise would be quite difficult. And so I'm just going to hope to the stars that those word-of-mouth organic referral activities result in, $3 million of revenue or whatever the number is. There's nothing wrong with that, so long as we are real about what it is, which is a wish, a hope. It's not something we manage our business around, right? We're not going to make decisions with any kind of expectation that 3 million or whatever my top down number is going to come to fruition, right? I'm not going to make staffing decisions. I'm not going to make investments. I'm not leaning forward in any way. I'm going to make decisions based on the realities of this business. But yeah, if I just want to say like, sure, it would be cool if this happened, great. I agree. We'll keep that in the back of our mind and we'll high five if it happens.
Right. So is there a point where you can say, hey, we have enough data to be able to make these decisions? Like, for example, if you're like trying to measure churn, right? There's all these different formulas where you can measure churn before you have like an actual client base and before you're actually, you're 3 months in and you can estimate some things. Like, is there a point for a newer agency where it's like, okay, now you do have enough information that we should be able to accurately predict these numbers?
Yeah. I mean, it's not like a objective science, obviously, right? Like I'm in the data business. I care about data, but probably for an accountant, I bias away from data more than most like me. I think here's another framework. When we thinking about the future, we sort of distinguish the concept of a forecast versus sort of a plan. And a forecast is something that I would predict outcomes beyond which I have line of sight to, right? Like, so I'm going to predict what's going to happen beyond what's in my CRM. And the thing that allows you to do that is a repeatable revenue generation function. And so the definition of do I or do I not have repeatable revenue generation is like pretty subjective. So again, that it really just refers to I do activities that have a reasonable expectation of results. And I think like there are some conversations on the margins to be had, like, oh, I do some things and maybe it's predictable, maybe it's not. Whatever, whether you choose to try to use the data or not, I don't think makes a huge difference. But for the 80 for 20, it's very clear to tell the difference. Like, again, the difference is my agency gets its projects, its new clients from word of mouth, organic, referral, incidental. That would not be repeatable revenue generation, in which case, yeah, you don't have any data to use. Versus I do activities like I have an outbound function. I'm sending emails or LinkedIn requests, and I maybe I don't have a perfect number for what percentage of them convert, but some of them are converting and I'm getting sort of like a feel and I can apply some assumptions, but I'm like doing real activities that have that have shown results versus just kind of, existing in the world. I think if you're in the latter camp, then you can start to use some assumptions and just refine over time. It's just the former camp where you really can't, you know what I mean? There's nothing there. And
so I guess, would you use and this is me doing a bunch of research on you before the episode.
Oh, good. Yeah. Love it.
The Lifecycle of Agencies.
Hey, there it is. Yeah. So what I would say, I mean, I think that, so I'll give just like for those who have not done the research. So the Lifecycle of Agencies is the framework we use to sort of describe the different phases of an agency's life, where we can help them understand that there's a class of problems that agencies in these stages often face, and there are solutions that have the best chance of success for those stages. And without going into all the details, we have sort of the create, build, grow, scale. That's what we describe. And so in our build mode, and that's like phase 2, if you will, and that is generally between like $1 million and call it $3 million in revenue, roughly speaking. We have what we call the hierarchy of financial needs, right? And that's like the hierarchy of financial needs, like based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is kind of like to sequentially order. These are the KPIs you should be focused on, one at a time. We're going to clear one. We're going to go to the next one. Anyway, the capstone to the hierarchy of financial needs is repeatable revenue generation. And so generally, like, it's our belief that in order for you to graduate to what we call a grow mode agency, which happens generally speaking in like the 2-3 maybe ish range of revenue, you need repeatable revenue generation. Said differently, I'm not familiar with that many agencies who have cleared that revenue mark just incidentally by word of mouth and referrals and things that don't have direct inputs. You definitely can get to the 1 to 2, maybe even 3, because you have a strong network and whatever. But like at a point, you need repeatable inputs to generate predictable outputs. And that is kind of like that's your degree to graduate from what we call build mode to what we call grow mode. And that opens a sort of host of new problems. So yeah, we use the hierarchy of financial needs or the life cycle of agencies to sort of help you define when you're likely to be in that forecasting phase and when you're likely not to be.
So I was just talking with an agency owner who refuses to set up recurring revenue because they find it too annoying to manage. And so they do projects, but they're questions.
The wildest thing I've ever heard. This is the opposite of what I've ever heard from any agent. Keep going.
Their question to the group was, how do I keep projects coming consistently then? Like, you do it by setting up recurring revenue. Like,
yeah, I mean, recurring revenue is the holy grail. I mean, it's the holy. Another like belief that I have is that I don't know what the threshold is, but that, we like to think about revenue as new or existing, which is slightly different, but in the same manner as recurring, non-recurring. The difference is recurring has a very narrow definition, which is, kind of like a retainer, right? Like I have this thing, it's predictable and it's sort of contractual in nature, right? Whereas existing offers the flexibility to say, in a given year, am I selling to a person that I worked with last year or not, right? Have I retained that revenue? One way to retain it is recurring revenue. Like, I just have this monthly retainer. It's the same every month. I just keep sort of cashing that check. Obviously, that's the best. No question. The other way to do it is what I call an annuity of projects, which is what your person was asking for, right? How do I get follow-on projects? And that to be honest with you, that's easier to do for if you're at the right phase. Like if you have a middle market client, your clients are like Main Street small businesses. Well, that's pretty hard, right? They're going to do a branding project once a decade, not going to get any follow-on. But if you're working with Procter & Gamble, Kimberly-Clark, Salesforce, whatever, like LinkedIn, Facebook, then it is very possible to get a project and then another project and then another project. Like that's the land and expand strategy. And so for sure, you can do that. And I believe that there is a ceiling on agencies who don't or who are not able to get at least 50% of the revenue in a given year from existing sources. Because it's just like if more than 50% of your revenue is coming from new logos every year, like unless you build this giant sales team, which by the way is kind of incompatible with the way most agencies grow, then you're not going to do it. Like, this one person can only do so much every year. Like you lose it, you gain it, you're staying flat. Like you have to stack revenue. And that has to come from retaining some of it, whether it's an annuity of projects or it's recurring revenue. So anyway, my answer to this person is like, oh my gosh, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. This is your oxygen. You must forget about it being annoying. I'll help you. You got to do it.
Right.
If it's there.
Yeah. That was the response, I think, echoed by everyone in the conversation.
Yeah. Because a lot of folks struggle to have. Not every service lends itself incredibly naturally to recurring revenue. There are some areas of marketing where, It just is the way it's done versus others. Like branding. If you're just like a straight brand strategy,
Right.
it's a little tricky to get a recurring revenue arrangement doing that work exactly. There's opportunities for different follow-ons and other things, but some lend itself better than others. But if you have it, take it.
Agreed. And that's where I think finding those adjacent offers, things that you can still deliver that fall within your realm, your area of specialization, that they might not have been asking for it up front, but you delivered that, and they're going to need this as like a subsequent offering. It's like, let's put that in front of them. And then even if it's a smaller retainer, right, it's still recurring revenue that's coming in, give you a little more predictability in your growth.
1,000%. And if nothing else, like these are not mutually exclusive. So it gives you if it's a small client, then maybe that's the end. But if it's a Salesforce or an IBM or whatever, it's a seat at the table. It's a touch point every single month and a paid opportunity to sell them new, larger projects or to get introductions to other groups or division leaders or whatever. So yeah, absolutely.
So going back to the life cycle of agencies, I'm a bit curious with AI, tech, the market. I think a lot more agencies are being created right now than ever before, even if a lot of them are kind of leaning towards the solopreneur side.
I think that's probably true.
I guess, are you seeing any changes for what each of those stages will look like internally because of all of these other things happening within the market?
Well, it is a good question. I mean, and everybody has biases that, and I think I'm actually going to steal this from Sam Altman, but so not even a bias. It's the man himself, right? Or one of. Like my bias is AI could be even bigger than we think in terms of opportunity, but no, and I'm not sure how much I believe is it going to be bigger, smaller, whatever, but it is definitely going to happen slower than we expect. And so, to be honest, like, everybody, us included, we're learning, we're implementing, we're trying this, we're trying that. I mean, at least from what I've seen, we work with about 115 agencies or whatever, something like that. I have yet to see it meaningfully transform the operations of anybody. Like I've yet to see it meaningfully transform the blueprint of how a person operates. I mean, the most natural thing that it will happen to the life cycle of agencies is it'll shrink the size of the organization that occurs at each revenue number, right? So like, it's going to create some natural efficiencies within the organization. So what was the, and I think it'll extend the inflection points, because some of, when we think about the life cycle of agencies, some of the inflection points, the new sets of challenges are a function of the complexity of the organization. The operating model that got us here won't be the one to get us there. And that's in part driven by the size of the org and the management structure to kind of make it all work. And so if AI is, compressing, shrinking the org and getting and increasing leverage, the leverage we get out of each individual, then I suspect you can sort of go a little further with a smaller team and maybe the sizes of these phases grow, right? The inflection point that we used to be at 3, it's now at 5, something like that. I don't know. I mean, I'd be interested in your point of view. I mean, knowing what you know about the life cycle, but also I know that you have a little bit of a you have a little bit of a bias toward and like you've spent more time with AI and some of these agencies. I'd be curious what ways you're seeing it like meaningfully impact some of these things and how you think it'll change the operating model at different stages.
Yeah. Well, I think it's either going to be a huge benefit or the ultimate end for an agency, depending on what stance they choose to take. A presentation I did with ZenPilot, actually, I think last month, was on the order of operations for AI within your agency. And so just how do you roll out AI in your agency so that you're not just using it to kind of facilitate all of these creative things your agency is doing that people are hiring you specifically for, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's a term, don't outsource like the main thing. And I think a lot of agencies are currently doing that by saying, I'm going to let AI write all of our content. I'm going to let it create all these graphics. It's like people are paying you for that specifically because you have strategic expertise after seeing this over and over and being able to deliver that. So why don't we use AI to get rid of all those tasks that like don't matter in order for us to get here? Like it's just the simple automation. I think it makes sense for a lot of people, but a lot of agencies still aren't using it because it's sexier to go use it for all of these other things. And so,
totally agreed. And again, that's kind of what I mean by leverage, right? Like, can I get more outputs from a single input, whether that's just internal stuff, right? What used to take some of my non-utilized time, I can sort of dispense with because I'm automating it with AI, or what would take, or even just sort of like, can I create a framework for myself on the creative work that I can apply my expertise to? Can I take what was 5 hours and take it down to 2 hours because some of the scaffolding is constructed for me? I think it'll be, I don't think you can draw a specific parallel, but like part of me is, part of me thinks about like the sort of web 2.0 and accounting, right? Like I can distinctly remember I used to consult for this company Xero, which is a competitor to QuickBooks, and and gosh, it's been probably like a decade now since like I would go around and speak to different accounting firms about the future of technology in the accounting space. And, at the time, like the number one accounting software in the world was Excel. And here comes, at the time, QuickBooks Online wasn't very popular. It was really just Xero, right? Xero ultimately pushed QuickBooks into it to generate, massive investments in this tool here in the US. And so there was just all this discussion around how like these tools are going to like automate all these things and the way that all this work is going to change. And so anyways, fast forward like 10 years, man, the landscape looks a lot like it did 10 years ago. I mean, it has changed some, but like all the things I said 10 years ago, still true, still definitely true. But man, like the world we projected back then for 2024 is so much different than what we thought it would be. And it's so much more like it was, which again, it just kind of goes back to like, I believe in the promise, but just human beings and their rate of adoption are just slow and stubborn. And so again, I think all this stuff just going to happen a lot slower than we expect. And people, again, like I'll get off my soapbox as soon as I'm done with this.
I'm going to keep you here.
Okay, great. Like people, take the creative stuff, right? Like people assume too much. Oh, I can just write a very brief prompt and then it's going to create like a movie trailer or whatever, like a commercial. And then it comes out with something that's really good compared to what, thought a robot could do, but certainly nothing that you could put in front of a client and sell, right? Like it doesn't. And so then we're just like, oh, this sucks, move on. Right. Like, and so because of the humans like misusing, having the wrong expectations, we work against ourselves. And so it's just the adoption cycle slows down. Right. We just hit these, I've read the article about McDonald's like abandoning the AI drive-through because it made some mistakes. Of course, it made some mistakes, right? Like we have a labor shortage problem. Like it's a wonderful solution for this, but let's put it in context. Like we can't, you can't turn all the keys to the car and expect it to be perfect on its first iteration, but we do that. And then we say, oh, we're done. So we set the whole exercise back, however long we set it back, because we put it in a position to fail, and it failed. And so we do that as humans. So I think because of us, it's just going to take longer to get out of it when we think we can.
So I guess what's your outlook for 2030 for?
Well, I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I'm an optimist. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a broad question. I am an optimist in general, and I bias that way. I'm also a service provider, so I'm optimistic about the service. Like there's all kinds of predictions that accounting would go, creative would go. Every industry has had its prognostication. And the message I always said back then about what like SaaS could do and the automation that was involved in SaaS, I think I still believe, which is, again, I think by 2030, we still won't, I don't know that we're going to feel an exponential step change. I think it will have happened slowly but we will look back, and I believe that we will have 50% leverage or whatever it is. Like it just, we will get there brick by brick, use case by use case. I mean, again, like think of the thing that is AI driven that we sort of take for granted is every meeting I get on has the meeting recorder. Firefly's on and Grain's on and this person's on, right? This is somewhat new. It's great. Like it's a really helpful tool that we've kind of adopted. And now I got these great notes and I got these, and AI did that. And I think that we're just going to have use case by use case it infiltrate our life and create a little bit more leverage and flexibility on our time. And I hope as a force for good. I don't know if I answered your question, but like I view it at least through 2030, a kind of an incremental adoption, not necessarily like an exponential adoption. I think that'll happen at some point. I'm not convinced it'll happen in the next 6 years.
Right. No, that was I think exactly what I was looking for. I'd read a study. Jury's still out. So I read one study though about just through AI, 10% of agencies, creative agencies, will be gone this year, and like separate from the normal attrition right of agencies every year. But just from AI, they're just going to landscapes changed, 10% gone. Snap of the fingers. What was that guy from the Marvel movies? Whatever. Yeah, exactly. Would have been better if I knew Thanos. There you go. If I had his name, that would have been a better reference. Yep. And so I was bringing that up, and what I realized is that almost no agency believes that they will be in that 10%. And so, because I think most of them are optimistic, right? They expect to keep going and being able to do this, and they should be. As entrepreneurs, you got to be optimistic, otherwise no one's going to follow you. And so it really pays to be optimistic. But I think by ignoring the fact that you could be in that 10% if you're not deliberate in how you're using AI and how you approach all of this, it could be way more than 10% that actually take that hit this year and next year and the year after, as things continue changing. So yeah, I would probably agree that things are going to go slower than normal, but I don't know. I think there's still a lot of inherent risk in not keeping up with the technology in a way that actually promotes your business.
Yeah, I think, I totally agree. It may be, by the way, I do think 10% agencies probably will go out of business this year, but not for AI. Maybe we sort of like post-mortem, apply the AI moniker. It is tough sledding out there. It's so fascinating. Like last year was a tough year. We kind of all recognized it. I don't feel like this year, and the press kind of captured it. I don't feel like this year gets quite the credit for being as tough of a year. But I think in our portfolio, we probably have more financial hardship than we did last year. Not at all because of AI, just because, if anything, I think we're kind of coming off of on the other side of the pandemic, there's a lot of free money, and we sort of buoyed organizations that would have just that probably shouldn't have existed. Like not every business should exist. That's a cold, hard fact. Some should, some shouldn't, just based on market need and quality of the work and so. But because of all the free money, we didn't see that natural attrition happen. It just always happens. And now we have the hangover and it's happening. And combine that with like high interest rates, whatever. So anyway, I do think agencies are going out of business this year for sure. I don't think it's AI outside of outside of like your Fiverr kind of level of creative work. I don't think, your serious branding organization, serious creative shop is going out of business because of AI. I don't believe their customers are able to outsource all their work to AI just yet. But it is an existential threat for sure. Again, I like to believe that it's an opportunity more than it's a threat, but that's just because that's what I like to believe. It's both.
Right. I'm starting to have more conversations with, especially like SEO agencies that are like seeing that challenge where people are bringing the work in-house because they can show like an intern how to use AI in order to get, an 80% result. And then it's just, okay, now we'll learn how to work it a little more and figure this out. But my comments, I guess, back to these agencies is like, you're not doing enough to provide value that only you can provide. Right. Just being able to produce the content isn't going to get them to win. It's got to be the right content with the right keywords, the right strategy. That's where you need to be leaning into. And once we work that into their offers, it's usually easier to
Well,
maintain that client
and
base.
look, I mean, I think not to say that AI is only a risk for the bottom. It's not. It's a risk everywhere. But naturally, it's going to attack the bottom, right? So, like for instance, if take the accounting world, right? Like AI is a real risk to people who are doing volume-based individual tax returns, right? Like your H&R Blocks of the world. It's a real risk to your very lower end bookkeeper. Here's $250 a month. I'm just going to like do a commodity. Like if you're providing a commodity offering, then you are at risk to something that can automate. By the way, you were always at risk. And so the natural, like this is
Right.
just a trend that has been around. This has been around for at least a decade. The idea of niching down, having a specialty, selling a true expertise. That was always true, still true. And if you don't, you were at risk of all other sort of forces, globalization, whatever. Now you're at risk of an additional force, which is AI. It's the same kind of stuff though, right? So to your point, yeah, if you're providing a commodity offering, sure, somebody's going to be able to outsource you. But if you are providing insight and expertise that you cannot get anywhere else, then you have a job. And I think, to be honest with you, you will quote unquote always have a job. I believe. Now, what does the expertise and insight and what is uniquely you, does that evolve? Sure. But I believe there's always space for that.
Yeah. So since I have you here, I want to spend more time talking about numbers because I think that's that's something I can get, or the audience can get tremendous value from you with. Not that everything you've shared already hasn't been included in that, but but I guess what patterns are you seeing most frequently in regards to like leadership teams when you're coming in, giving them like, CFO type level advice on how they should be looking at numbers within their agency? What are some of those challenges you're bumping up against? Hesitancies, I guess, from leadership, or things that they could be doing differently in order to make a huge difference in their business?
It's a good question. I think, a couple things. One, again, I think the answer to that question depends a little bit on the life cycle of agencies, right? So different agencies at different sizes have different inherent biases. But I think, again, I think overall there is a lack of embrace for the idea that one operating model will not sustain you from 0 to 50 million in revenue. It doesn't work, right? And so sometimes we get the agencies in build mode who say, I don't want to track time. That's not what we do for our culture. Like we don't do this. But there's a whole kind of debate or whatever. But my relatively strong point of view is that's fine, but there's a natural ceiling. I mean, outside of a small type of agency that sells a high volume of homogenous services, you can manage margin and supply demand without tracking to the hour. But if you're a more traditional sort of creative agency where you have like a smaller volume of heterogeneous projects, they take different shapes, there's a ceiling on how far you're going to get without tracking time. Like that's the input of that. That is the resource that you're paying for on a fixed fee, and you have to match supply and demand. And to be able to understand, am I utilizing my team and am I earning good project margins? There's just no substitute for that. But you run into agencies that are like, yeah, that's a non-starter for me. I'm like, that's fine, but you've placed a natural ceiling on your agency, right? You face other agencies who have kind of gotten to the size of agency where, so this is another like inflection point where, we say when you get into grow mode, it's that you had an agency that was earning profits and it was rocking and you were feeling really good. And then the wheels start to fall off and there's tension with clients and employees and you have some churn and you see some clients, some employees leave. And part of that is because you've sort of like, you've exceeded the size that your operating model can work. And so now you've got new employees who are not part of the family that you initially were hired in at. And you now have decisions being made that are like multiple levels removed from the core leadership team. And so managing centrally with this core leadership team or this core CEO is a bottleneck. It's slowing people down. It's creating frustration and it's limiting people's growth. And so the operating model that works at a larger size is by shrinking the agency into discrete departments or business units or service offerings where you can create deputies who have autonomy and accountability and incentives to drive their individual results that ladder up to yours. Anyways, that's just an example of it requires a new operating model. And you just occasionally have folks who have had success to their point and bias towards, I do what worked. Gotcha. But just to be clear, again, this is a journey. The operating model evolves. What got you here won't get you there. And so if we run into challenges, it's just with, that resistance to throwing the playbook out and pulling out a new one. But to be honest with you, it's required.
I don't know if it's the technical name, but I heard it referenced like this somewhere. But it's called the Curse of the Red Queen, right? What got you here today won't get you there tomorrow, because the game of chess.
Curse of the Red Queen. I'm going to use that. I don't play a lot of chess, but it does roll off the tongue nicely. So I'm going to use it.
Doesn't it?
That's good.
But yeah, I think it's well documented that one of the most dangerous phrases in the English language is "that's how we've always done it."
I know.
I've seen it in multiple organizations. So yeah, I have zero doubt that that's the blocker for a lot of these companies.
Yeah, totally. And I think, and even all the way down to, we had this conversation earlier. I can think of another agency that has been struggling, and back to I don't believe you can exceed a certain level of growth if you do not retain revenue. I'm having this really, one of the hardest businesses to run is like your purely project-based branding agency that serves like a lower middle market client who's only ever going to get a rebrand once a decade. 100% of your work is new. You could have a record quarter in Q1 and you could go out of business in Q2. That's just the reality of that business. There's no harder business on the planet to run. So I'm having this conversation, which is like, this is just the facts. It feels hard. It's always going to feel hard. We have to find a way to move our segment or sell a different thing if we are going to retain these individuals. And there's just no interest, right? And so it's like, all good. Gotcha. But again, like in order to get, like, you could do that to get here. But now that you're here, like, this is going to be tough sledding unless we apply the new operating model. It's tough. Inertia is a bitch.
Yeah, I think one of a challenge just amongst leadership teams is like you can't grow past whatever the constraint of that business is, right? And so you're constantly seeking, what is my current constraint that I need to remove so that I can advance? And a lot of times a leader does not look at themselves as that potential constraint. And so when in reality, sometimes often the place.
Sometimes it's true. Sometimes it's true. I'll leave it at that. I totally agree.
Well, Ryan, great conversation. I got 2 more questions that I want to send your way.
Hit me up. What we got?
So first one, what book do you recommend every agency leader should read?
Yeah, good question. You're going to have to edit this out because now I'm like struggling. I have like have an answer for this that I often use, but why am I forgetting it? Go to your second question. I'll give you the answer for the first question. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry. I just can't come up with the title. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Where can people learn more about you?
Oh, well, that I can answer for you. So you can find us a couple places. Obviously, our website, upsourcedaccounting.com. And we also have a YouTube channel at Upsourced, where we put on all kinds of content like this and have great conversations with people like Chris. One of these days, we'll have to have you on our podcast. And I'd love to learn more about your coaching business. So yeah, cool. By the way, awesome. The book, I mean, there are a couple books. The one, to be honest with you, the one that I'm going to go that's like a little bit old school that I still think holds up and is also just like a little bit self-serving because of how we operate is the E-Myth. I love the E-Myth. Like I love that as a core operating, like lots of agencies read traction and there's, E-Myth is kind of like traction before traction existed, but I just love the sort of, there's nothing fancy about it. It's nothing like, there's no new kind of like frameworks or whatever to sort of reinvent. It's just like very core principles for how to create a repeatable business. Love it. Anyway, EMEP.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Get that
Cool.
documented.
So, Chris,
Ryan, thanks for joining.
Yeah, this has been fun, man.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. That's the show, everyone. You can leave a rating and review, or you can do something that benefits you. Click the link in the show notes to subscribe to Agency Forward on Substack. You'll get weekly content, resources, and links from around the internet to help you drive your agency forward.